In this video, we'll go over the inheritance concept. A base class called GeometricObject has already been defined. Let's take a look at it. There's the GeometricObject class. It has two private data members, the color, which is of the type string, and filled, which is of the type Boolean. The class has two constructors, a default constructor, or constructor with no parameter, and a second constructor with two parameters. The parameters are used to initialize the private data members of the class. The class has also get and set functions for the color data member, also functions to set the value of the filled data member. It's called setFilled, and also isFilled that returns a Boolean and checks to see whether the shape is filled with color or not. There's also a function called toString that returns a string type. We'll next look at the implementation of these functions. Let's go to GeometricObject.cpp. Here is the implementation. The constructor with no argument sets the color and filled to white and false respectively. Constructor with two parameters will set the value of the private data members to the parameters. We have the get color, set color. We know how they work. isFilled will check the value of filled and return the value. It's either true or false. setFilled will set the value of the filled private data member. And toString here, which returns a string, basically returns a string which is identifies the type of object. In this case, it's a geometric object. Very simple. Next, we'll derive new classes from this base class, GeometricObject. The first new class that we're going to derive from the base class is called circle. So let's go to the header file for the circle. Here's the definition of the circle class. Line 5 shows circle, public geometric object. That's the syntax that's used to indicate that the circle class is inheriting data members and functions from the geometric object class. So the circle class will have the color and filled data members that is inheriting from the geometric object. It is also inheriting all the functions in the geometric object as well, such as setColor, getColor, isFilled, setFilled. All those functions are inherited by the circle. But circle adds its own data members as well. In this particular case, it adds one data member, radius, which is of the type double. The circle class has three constructors. A constructor with no argument, a constructor with one parameter, and then this third constructor which has three different parameters. The circle class has get and set functions for the radius data member. It adds the function get area, get perimeter, get diameter, and also the toString function. Let's now go to the implementation of these functions. We'll go to the file derived circle CPP. Here is the file. The constructor with no argument sets the value of radius to 1. The constructor with one parameter basically calls the function setRadius and passes the radius parameter as argument and sets the value of radius. And then we have this third constructor that receives three parameters and initializes the radius, the color, and filled. Keep in mind that the circle is inheriting the private data members color and filled from the base class geometric object. So this constructor allows the circle to initialize those inherited data members as well. So in line 19, the radius is initialized, and in lines 20 and 21, basically the functions setColor and setFilled are called, and the color and filled parameters are passed to those functions to set the value of those data members. Next is getRadius, returns the value of the radius. setRadius will validate the value of the parameter, makes sure that the parameter radius is greater than or equal to 0, and sets the value of radius. We have the function getArea, uses pi r squared formula to compute the area of the circle. We have the circumference or perimeter of the circle is evaluated as well in line 43, get perimeter function. Get diameter basically multiplies radius by 2 and returns the diameter of the circle. And finally, we have this toString function. It's important to pay attention to this toString function. Keep in mind that the base class had a toString function as well, and that function in the base class is inherited by the circle class, but the circle is redefining it. So if you recall, the toString function that was inherited from the base class actually returned the string GeometricObject. So the circle class is redefining it. It's the same function. The name of the function is the same. It's redefining it, and in the redefinition, it returns the string circle object. Now let's continue and define the next new object. It is called rectangle. So we'll go to the header file where the class rectangle is defined. We're going to derive this new class rectangle from the base class GeometricObject. So rectangle will inherit once again the color data member as well as filled data member from the GeometricObject, along with all the functions from GeometricObject. Rectangle introduces two private data members, width and height. Rectangle class has three constructors, a constructor with no argument, a constructor with 2 parameters for width and height, and then a constructor with 4 parameters. This third constructor basically receives 4 parameters. 2 of the parameters, width and height, are used to initialize the private data members of the rectangle class, width and height, and the other 2 parameters, color and filled, are used to initialize the color and filled private data members inherited from the base class GeometricObject. Other functions in the rectangle class are getWidth, setWidth, setting and getting the height. It has a function to get area or compute and return the area of the rectangle, get perimeter, and then also toString function again, which returns a string. Now let's look at the implementation of the functions in the rectangle class. Here they are. The constructor with no argument sets the width and height to 1, and the constructor that receives parameters for width and height basically calls the setWidth, setHeight functions inside rectangle to set those values. And here is the third constructor that receives parameters to set width, height, as well as the color and filled data members inherited from the GeometricObject, the base class. And notice this setColor function that's used to set the value of color, as well as setFilled function, they are inherited from the GeometricObject class. The getWidth and setWidth basically return the width, and the setWidth sets the value of width with some validation that takes place here. Same with height. And then the area of rectangle, it's just the product of width and height that's returned. The perimeter basically is sum of all 4 sides of the rectangle. Now the toString method that you see here, this function is inherited from the base class geometric object, and the rectangle class is basically redefining it. And in the redefinition, the return string is rectangle object rather than geometric object. Now let's write a main function and test these objects. So I have the main function right here, test geometric object.cpp. We'll go there. Here we have included the header files for geometric object, derived circle, and derived rectangle. The main function starts by creating an object of the type geometric object. The name of it is shape. We call the functions setColor and setFilled on the shape object. And then also in line 12, we print out the content of this shape object. In particular, we call the toString function in the shape object. So this toString function is the function defined inside the base class geometric object. So we expect to see geometric object to be displayed here. We also take a look at the color and whether the object is, this particular shape is filled with color or not. Line 16 creates an object of the type circle with radius 5. So the constructor that receives a single parameter is used here. The setColor and setFilled functions inherited from the base class are used here to basically set the value of color and filled. In line 19, again, we display the content of the circle object. In particular, we make a call to toString function using the circle object. This toString function is the one redefined inside the circle. So basically, it will return the string circle object. We'll look at the values of other data members inside the circle by calling functions inside the circle: getColor, isFilled, getRadius, getArea, and so forth. Line 26 creates an object of the type rectangle. It uses the second constructor that received two parameters. We have the width and height parameters here. Call the function setColor, setFilled, inherited from the base class, and then also in line 29, again, we print the content of the rectangle. In particular, once again, we call the function toString in rectangle. So this toString function is the one that is redefined inside the rectangle class. So we expect this function to return the text rectangle object. We call the functions getColor, isFilled, and the rest of the functions defined inside the rectangle to just make sure that they work properly. So I run this main function, and the output that I get will hopefully appear. Here it is. Here's the output. So the geometric object, so this geometric object in the output is the result of this cout shape.toString. So it says geometric object, color red, filled is true, and then it moves on to the circle object, and the returned value of circle.toString is circle object, and the output basically displays the content of the circle object, the area, the perimeter, and so forth. Same thing with the rectangle object.